I want you to have a look again, something we've mentioned once or twice, at mathematics. Being an attempted and sometimes successful labeling by numbers instead of by names and words, but in a very specific way that we have been talking about for the last few tapings, and that is it being likened to life's initial attempt to introduce denotation instead of connotation. Life's attempt to produce a language that was based on objectivity instead of subjectivity. Now, surely probably somebody has said something like that in the ordinary world before, but that is a fair definition expanded outside the field of strictly science that mathematics was attempting to do. Now, if you get past just the area of science, which of course we're about to do, look at it as being the initial attempt. It still stands. There has been no other widespread attempt, even enough to mention, of life introducing through men an attempt to present some sort of language no longer based on that which is open to personal prejudice and bias, oftentimes known as subjectivity, that the whole point of mathematics was supposed to be. Again, I remind you, I'll help you in a second, take it outside the world of strictly science, in the classroom, in the laboratory. But it was an attempt to present a language based upon objectivity. Now, in the classroom, in the laboratory, in the world of academia, no problem. But could I point out to you what else the introduction of mathematics has done that has never been analyzed because it was not pertinent? But analyze it, I'm about to be. In a certain, very peculiar way, I'll admit. The introduction of mathematics gave rise to the distinct impression, unanalyzed, but the distinct impression that it was possible to have and to communicate information free of personal bias, prejudice, and just routine human error. Now, as always, all you people are good enough, and you people out there on tape seeing this, God knows whether you're good enough, but you got to jump back and forth real quick between what seems to be metaphor and what seems to be non-metaphor. To say that it gave rise to the impression of the possibility, now if we look at it from a strictly three-dimensional scientific sense, we would say it not only gave rise to the impression, it damn well did it. That is, unless you're insane, because 2 is always 2. It's always that. It doesn't matter if we had somebody silly enough, a mathematician or somebody in a classroom, and we said, all right, the 2 is this. And it turns out that one guy, for whatever strange reason, has a personal bias against, and every time 2 arises, he makes it 2.7, 5.6. Of course, it's ridiculous. In the classroom, in the strictly so-called scientific area, it has succeeded. If you go no further than mathematics itself, if it stays within its own circular, secondary system as concocted by life through man, through man's intellect. But it has further with no analyzation, with no way that man has had occasion to look at it, it has seeped over into areas even with people who might be even mathematically illiterate. It has had a wide genetic effect on humanity because it has seeped in, it has laid the groundwork for people believing, for people thinking that it is possible to have, now forget just mathematics, but to have a language that was free of bias. Even if they are truly mathematically illiterate, but they do not even know the multiplication tables, it's already on the basis, if you talk to somebody for a second, if you got the middle class, ordinary, sane person that might say, I can't remember multiplication tables. But if we ask them, well, even though you may not have occasion to use mathematics, is it your opinion, do you think that mathematics is a stable, dependable, predictable form of communication between people that need it, that does not rely on their personal prejudice or that a guy gets up and he's not quite awake yet, and he hadn't had his morning coffee, some mathematician, it is possible he's going to confuse 2 and 4,760. And let's assume, if you're following what I'm saying, that the person will say, well, no, probably not. But it has a wider effect. It is just one of life's little CP tricks. It is a grand grasp at verbal consistency. I made the statement, I stand by it, ... for a second. It is a grand grasp at verbal consistency. It would appear, if you're following what I'm saying thus far, without any of you who are frightened by numbers, it would appear to be the singular attempt, the grand gesture to come up with verbal consistency. Would it not? Even if you have no occasion to use mathematics, would you not agree? Just being a middle class, fairly sane, sophisticated, intellectual, blah, blah, blah person. I'll answer for you, yes. It would be the, up till now, grandiose gesture and attempt to in some way pluck out, to conceive of, to establish verbal consistency. Numbers. But now note, maybe I shouldn't think about that for a second. Strike now note and stay with attempted verbal consistency. I wanted some of you to chew on that for just a second, so I'll play like the I had an equation in my throat. Right, now that you thought about it, then I'll assume that all of you followed that it is the singular, striking, admirable, grand, profitable grasp at coming up with verbal consistency. Let's assume that all of you cannot deny that. Now note the worldwide, widespread human indifference and very often downright hostility toward numbers. It's not limited to a few little nippers here and there in the kindergarten or the second or third grade. There are plenty of walking around. I was trying not to spill the beans when I started this already with you people. There are probably plenty of you sitting right here in this room or seeing this on tape that you might not be a fanatic about it in a negative sense. You may not need to have psychiatric treatment. But I'm sure, I am positive, in a crowd this size and out there on tape right now, whatever year that is, you're seeing it now, I know about how many, that there is a large percentage of you that have a complete indifference, at the very least, toward mathematics, toward numbers, and there another part of you that, if the truth be known in a certain way, are downright hostile. Why else would people pay somebody to do their taxes, for instance? I shouldn't have to prove this. It is just a fact. So, which class was this? Automobile mechanics or mathematics or philosophy? Logic. Oh yeah. All right. I know where I am now. I know where I am. We had established this, that mathematics was the grand gesture, the grand grasp right now to establish a language, or at least a sub-language, of verbal consistency. We all agreed to that. Now I brought up the second part. That being true, the second part states, according to, that there is widespread, worldwide indifference and oftentimes downright hostility toward numbers. So we put those two together, and you've got to face this. That there would seem to be a distinct possibility, may I suggest, that life/man tends to have some kind of favorable inclination toward things being inconsistent and subjective. Does not deny the part of life that says contraire, the very part of life, so to speak, that came up with the mathematical language, the very part that pursues, finds favor with the possibility that there could be a non-subjective language that was consistent. So we got that part of life. And mathematics are known today, I guess more or less, all over this planet. But also all over this planet are people that may not ever have occasion to put it this specifically in words, but if it came to it, they could live quite well, thank you, without having to fool around with numbers. It's just too much trouble. I don't like it. In fact, I'd rather pay somebody to do this for me. I just don't even fool with it. I don't even have to fool. They got places now, I guess you know, that you go in and somebody charges you money to fill out your application for your automobile tag and taxes. Which I assume all of you who drive, if you look at, I don't know what it takes, I never timed it, maybe 60 to 90 seconds. And you have to put in a few numbers here and there, but most of the time it's already pre-added for you. But there are people who charge, and it's generally on this basis. We could say it was other reasons. It could be a matter of creeping illiteracy or semi-illiteracy, but I would suggest to you in some cases that there are people around who simply look down at something and it's got numbers all over the place. And somebody for $5 will take it off your hands and take care of it. Now could we make one of those nice little quantum sidesteps at least into an expanded direction when I suggest to you that this would show that there is still a sizable segment of life operating through men that, in spite of operating coevally with this operational example of the possibility, and even a stronger suggestion that there can be language that is non-subjective and that is consistent, simultaneously with that is another large segment that seems to be totally indifferent, at the very least, and as I said, at the worst, if you want to put it that way, would appear to be hostile, that I do not even want to fool with it. And forget what would appear to be the cloak, the verbal cloak of them perhaps saying, well, I just don't like numbers, I was terrible at it in high school. They can say that. But if you get outside the world now of applying for your automobile tag, for doing your own taxes, since part of, as I presented to you, the production of mathematics was in part a strong suggestion by life that it is possible that there could be a language that was non-subjective and that was consistent, then, outside, beyond numbers, then I'm going to have to point out to you that there's still a large segment of life through man that operationally is sort of like, who needs it? Who cares? That they, of course, are not saying this specifically in another direction, but through their own rejection, through their own indifference toward the possibility of a non-subjective language in the 3D world. It's one thing I like about talking about the 3D world. You can only dance forward or backwards. You can only do the two-step or sit down. So what they're saying, whether they want to or not, what they're saying is, I prefer things being inconsistent. I prefer things being subjective. You got no choice. That's the way it is. A real little sidestep, if you're interested just for a second. There's a kind of, what I'm about to say appears to be more probably psychological than some of you may have been taking what I'm saying now out there on tape, but it's all the same thing. It's not psychological. That's just the surface of it. But dealing with mathematics, statistics, to be specific, there's a kind of safety in that, because the more you're using numbers or statistics, the less likely the person is doing it to be accused of having some sort of personal bias. You could make prejudicial statements towards some group of people, sexually or racially or religiously. And if you do it statistically, and you're wearing some thick glasses and you look like at least a semi-nerd, I guess, or an intellectual. I understand there's some difference, but I don't have time to go into that. As long as you come out with statistics, you could make all sorts of prejudicial remarks. But there seems to be a kind of cushioning effect that you're not saying something about people, you're saying something about numbers. Well, the statistics show, if you're talking about your neighboring some state, the polka dot people, with some different religion, a neighboring state, and you're here in one state, and you're making some kind of comments, you can make hostile comments toward another group, but instead of talking about people, you talk about numbers. You say, well, the statistics show, I don't think there can be a doubt, that our neighbors to the left, over to the west, our neighbors have 32% more crime, they have 45% more alcohol addiction, and you are less likely to be directly attacked by saying, well, you are just prejudiced toward those people. Did I say anything about those people? Did I mention any of those people? Well, no, but I know what you're saying. Well, no, you don't. You must not have finished college, sir. I don't know why you... I have no feeling toward those people. I am simply repeating the numbers involved. Numbers don't lie. Well, then, numbers don't care. If you're saying 32% of a population group is addicted to alcohol, it doesn't care whether it's us, whether it's our neighbors. Numbers don't care. Oh, well, maybe you're right. Of course, those of you who are really sharp, you might, I wasn't going to stop here, might learn that you could use that in a certain way on yourself. Or, of course, you might see that life has used that on you already, and that you have been kicked around and insulted and laughed at in ways that you never imagined. And I don't mean by other people. Insofar as who I do mean, we're running late and I don't have time to go into it. But everyone is subject to this. The world is not divided into laughers and laughees. Oh, yeah, it is, I'll admit. But if you think you know which group is which, then you're almost irreversibly in the latter group, and you just don't know it. Well, I was going to also point out beyond the area of just specific mathematics as a science, and even beyond people ever having any occasion to think about it, which kind of stuff I already talked about tonight, you should know. All you got to do is check your own genetic background, that even accidentally you would have never thought anything about this, because most people don't even want to think about mathematics and numbers. But in spite of all that, I was going to point out that the ordinary flow, not just in science, but the ordinary flow of everyday knowledge, everyday talk, everyday information, is already mathematical no matter what people say it is. They can be talking about the social sciences, the soft sciences, but they're always talking mathematically in a specific way. Would you tell us? Here I go. In that, all talk of all nature always represents an equation of sorts. Let that be the term. An equation of sorts. Not science, not mathematics is it limited to. Sociology, psychology, religion, everyday affairs, all social, verbal intercourse, the passing of all sorts of information. My, don't you look nice? Hello, I want you to meet my uncle. Whatever it is always an equation of sorts. Now, I guess someone could say, well, how could that be? Well, we don't have time for that either. Now I'm going to tell you. Well, I'm going to have to give you another definition, or my own, of what an equation is. An equation everywhere, mathematics and now into all the areas of non-mathematics, all equations are simply comparisons. Now I guess probably I wouldn't even get any great argument if I left it just hanging there loose, even from the area, the field of mathematics. You're dealing with a comparison. You're comparing a previously known with a new unknown. Is that not a definition, the way we have been talking the last 2 or 3 tapings, of what all human talk is? No? Okay, there are some levels that you could say the talk is bordering on total boredom, absolutely mechanical, of no great consequence, so innocuous. But if the talk seems to be passing along any sort of stimulating information between peoples, then it is in the form of an equation. Because if you're making any comment that is going to spur a reaction from someone else, positive, negative, it doesn't matter, then what you're doing is you're making a comparison that surprises them. Or you're making a comparison, at least. I don't mean surprise in that sense. But you are, through your speech, comparing a previously known, at least as far as you're concerned, and perhaps as far as they're concerned. I'm not going to get involved. You can figure this out mathematically. Or if you want to do it at the childish or the cruder level, the simpler level, psychologically. You can say something to somebody that, as far as you're concerned, is a given already. That is, you're taking a previously known something or other. I'm not talking about math, of course. I'm talking about the field of human affairs. It can be that, or it can be a combination, or it can be the alternative. It can be that you're saying something that they accept, but you've got like a common premise that you start with, that you tell a person, hey, let's verbally dance. And you go da-da-da-da-da, and so both of you are dancing. And then you go, ah, oftentimes, but, ah, da-da-da-da-da. And they stop dancing for a second. And you go, It's an equation of sorts. It is a comparison of a previously known either by the speaker, by the listener, by some combination, and it is a comparison of a previously known with a new unknown. Now, I don't mean something absolutely new that you're saying, well, I notice you have red hair, and the person says, well, yes. So we got a previously known, and you say, well, that reminds me somewhat of a Martian turnip. No, I don't mean that kind of new unknown that's silly and ridiculous. It can be, certainly, it's got to be something that your words represent something that the person has at least some connotation thereof that it associates with them, and they go, well, yeah, I may not know the definition of the term, but you say turnip, I know what a turnip is. What you're doing, though, is giving a connotation. You're giving a subjective, numerical, believe it or not, spin to this equation that you're taking a previously known something and you're comparing it now with a later unknown new something. Even if the word, the concept, you thought, perhaps both of you say, yeah, I know what it means, but what you have done is put a new number on it, subjectively. Well, you could also note that all of this in the ordinary world is the way that ordinary things grow. It is the plodding one step at a time. It is the only way, and I'm not talking about growing turnips. I'm talking about that the apparent secondary world of the human intellect expands and the nexus becomes more and more complex. We get more and more information. More and more things are connected. We make new discoveries, new technological advances. All of it's on the basis of like throwing a slinky on the wall or that other thing that flip-flops and it goes doom, da, doom, da, doom, da, doom. All right, that is the way. It's not an unfair picturization that human progress, the great march of progress, is not so much a march as, somebody looking like Red Fox going. And all that is the movements of an equation of sorts, the kind I'm telling you about. It is the movement of a comparison that the step on one foot is a known something, a previously known something, and then the next one is the surprise to some degree, that you're comparing the next step with this one. That is the way things ordinarily grow. It is a gradual and a relatively, from some views, which I'll have to take up for here in just a second, a relatively slow method of growth. So much so that I was going to say that for a neural subversive, for a real revolutionist, it is much too gradual and it is much too slow. That if you have got to spend your intellectual life and your energies comparing things to know whether they're worthwhile, to know whether they're true or whatever of those other silly words that people are still using in life, that if you've got to compare it, if you've got to be a part of the ordinary flow of this equation of sorts, you'll never get around to finding out anything. You may have an interesting hobby. You may turn into a mathematician. Or you may turn into a really hair-on-fire hater of mathematics. Doesn't matter. But you will be involved with trying to analyze the numbers themselves, the stats. You're still fooling around with the equations. You could look at this kind of stuff. You could look at this kind of stuff as being a kind of super, make that angular mathematics. All right, make it super angular mathematics. And from a certain view, you could actually say that this kind of stuff, not just me talking, but that this kind of stuff, when it's in your own nervous system, in your own brain, this kind of stuff actually does what mathematics always purported to and dreamed of doing. But it still does it in words, which is part of the non-sequitorial aspect that I just a few minutes ago was saying, how somebody could be changing the number by their own subjectivity, which belies what mathematics was, even by my own admission when I started, that mathematics would be objective. And yet people can make numbers mean something else. They don't think of it that way. Never mind. This kind of stuff, as I was attempting to say, does mathematically, in a certain way, what mathematics has always tried to do, that is, present a truly objective language, except this does it still using words. Now, if I was an ordinary sort and was sitting around listening to this kind of stuff, I could say, well, that's about, I've heard some weird stuff here. But that's about as weird, that's about as incorrect as could be, because the kind of stuff that I've been hearing here is about as far removed from being objective or being constant. I mean, if we're going to talk about consistency, well, let's talk about inconsistency. This kind of stuff should be the picture next to the definition in the dictionary. No. I know why you say that. Well, you didn't say that. I just said that. But I know why you might say that. It is a kind of, it's a kind of transitory consistency. I know that's non-sequitorial also. It is a kind of objectivity involved, there is a kind, on this basis, that's still using words. You got to jump back and forth now right quick from one stream to the other. But in the 3D world, the ordinary use of human language, it is impossible not to be subjective. That is, to use the kind of energies that is the reality behind the form of such names as objectivity and subjectivity. Ordinary speech is subjective, the use of words, as opposed to, for our temporary paradigm tonight, as opposed to what mathematics seem to be, being sans subjectivity, that there is an objectivity at the basis of mathematics. That being true, then anything that's not mathematics, anything that's in words to some degree, has got to be subjective. Yes, except this kind of stuff. And I can still speak for you and say, well, no, that didn't prove it by saying that. Here I go. It is a kind of multidimensional, it's not three-dimensionally objective, and I'll grant you that. But it is objective on this basis, that even while using words, this kind of stuff, you got to listen quick, in the equation does not go along with the objective, unchangeable fact that 2 and 2 equals 4, for instance. This kind of transitory consistency is that it doesn't care what the hell it equals. Well, I see that pleased some of you people's brain chemistry, but I'm quite aware, those of you who it didn't, it's insane in a sense, but there is no real other way of putting it that comes to mind readily. In other words, those of you who think you missed it terribly, if for the time being we say at the 3D level, at the level of gravity-held thinking, of the human intellect, if I said, all right, there are two possible languages. One would be mathematics, being the only real example of the attempt to have a language that is objective, that the person speaking, that is, the nervous system that is acting as a conveyance of the language, of the energy, has no input. That 2 and 2 is always 4, no matter who says. Whoever says 2 and 2, assuming that they're going to be correct, then no matter who says it, tall, short, old, whatever religion, 2 and 2 is 4. That would be objective language. On that basis in the 3D world, everything that was not mathematics, to some degree, is going to be subjective. Bias, opinion, they call all sorts of things. But it would be subjective. That there is no assurance, there is no consistency, in the same way that 2 and 2 equals 4 is to say, all right, a man and a woman, a husband and wife, equals love. It may equal murder. Even if it equals love, if we left it at that, then you got to admit this. Everybody's concept of love has certain little shadings. It's not the same. Reverence, anything. So you've got subjectivity. The third possibility, of course, there's not even a third possibility at the 3D level, but I'm pointing out to you would be another kind of language that would be in its own way objective, but this time it does not have to be put in mathematical form. It could still be words. But in this case, it's not that 2 and 2 necessarily is 4 in this other, let's call it a 5-dimensional transitory consistency of language. It's not that 2 and 2 is 4. It's not that 2 and 2 is not 4. It's not that, well, 2 and 2 may be 4, but I personally don't like it. Or I personally don't like it under these conditions today. All right, it's all of that, and then it's none of that. The transitory consistency of this kind of language would be that you can still use words, but in a sense, you don't care what the hell they mean. Is that better than me saying the other version of, all right, if we're going to call it objective in the sense that, well, in a more multidimensional sense that mathematics is, rather than just saying that, well, I don't care what words mean, it would be, all right, 2 and 2 is 4, you say? Okay, I don't care. All right, that was just a test. 2 and 2 is not 4. I don't care. 2 and 2 is 24. So what? Of course, the operations of this kind of language, the part I'm playing of the reaction to it, would be lacking. Because to not care, you'd have no reaction. You would have no local prejudice. You would have no local preference. Now try to jump away from numbers to what the words mean. But notice, is that the way life is wired up? Not hardly. And not because of some psychological flaw that I've suddenly seen through. It's just at a greater dimension, you look at human speech. You see Cardinal Fang, if we were still back in his time, he stands up and he says, we're here, the church loves you people. Now everyone who is not a member of the church, not a follower of our church, raise your hand. They start to raise them, so that our men can kill you. Now, let us say that you're an outside observer to history or something. You go, there it is. There is the kind of folly, if not insanity, of language. To say, we're here in the name of the gods. We're here to help you. Or it could be a political party. All sorts of things. And you find in human language what? Irony. I know. In other words, it is open to criticism. You can't depend on people. Your sister married this guy. You never did trust him, but you married this guy. There they stood. You helped to win some money to help pay for the wedding. There they stood. Do you take this man forever and ever? Do you love him? Yes, yes, yes. 2 weekends later, he beat the hell out of her. They had to have him put in jail. And they stood there and looked at each other. They had tears in their eyes. Now, if you're an ordinary person, it's the time for, if not irony, cynicism, downright hostility. It's the nature of life. You can say, well, you can't trust anybody. My father used to always be telling me how much he loved me. He'd tell me that at least once a day, but at least twice a day, he'd kick me. He'd mistreat me. So you can keep pointing out that you cannot depend on human language. At that level, that's as true a statement as anything. I can't argue with that. But beyond that level of believing that there is some folly involved, That is, that we need a language. Now that I'm speaking now for ordinary intelligence, if they were sitting here hearing this, they could say, well, you're right. Now I think about it, I don't know what to do about it. But we would be better off if we had a specific objective language. Now I said that it had never been done really outside of mathematics. Some of you may know, this is a semi-sidetrack. I wasn't really going on that, but to show you is, what they call it, that Bertrand Russell, the attempt to come up with a universal language, Espanol, what do they call it? Esperanto. Yeah. Of course, you notice, even I can't remember the name of it, how popular it was. But, well, the point was, some of you should have your nervous system in such a place back at the ordinary level that when you heard about it before, or if I refresh your memory, that a group of people, they'd said this before. There's traces of this 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. But the idea was that if we had a common language, we would not be so inclined, that is humanity, to fight one another. If the French and the Germans had the same language, that there'd be less likelihood of them going to war. If we all spoke the same language, it might not be heaven on earth, and we might suddenly, or not might be a case that we suddenly all understand each other, but at least there'd be a better opportunity that we might in some way come to common agreement on things, without having to go to translators, without standing across the fence from France to Germany or from Poland to Russia and shaking your fist and somebody hollering. You don't know whether they're shaking their fist, that they're hollering, let's have a good time, or whether they're saying, you know, your mother wears combat boots. You don't know whether they'd be mad. You got to wait. Well, what do he say? I don't know. I don't like his looks anyway. But if you could talk in a common language, and what they're saying by common language, if we could have an objective language, it was consistent, there'd be less likelihood to fight. And as I said, notice what great progress that they've made implementing that. But back to the more specific area where I was talking about. You could look upon this kind of stuff as being a common language. Not with anybody else, of course. It's with you. It's that there's a new place that you can learn to talk, that is, inside of your own brain, think, and there is a kind of objectivity, and it's not, of course, the definition of objectivity that's in the dictionary or in the old building side of your own brain, because it's almost just laugh-producing. Several times I've done it for me to say, well, that kind of objectivity, outside of numbers, now into words, that kind of objectivity is simply that you don't care what it means. Yeah. Which, three-dimensionally, by now you people should know, if that's all I can say about it, that's either a silly joke or it's insane or it must mean something else. Aha. Mm-hmm. The sentence is much bigger than that, but it won't fit in a three-dimensional world. Because saying you don't care is not correct, it's not incorrect, but that would be objectivity. You ought to be able to get a glimpse of that. And it's not I don't care in some pessimistic or some smart-ass way, but it would be that you're no longer critical, that you no longer believe your own nervous system, which came up in one of the little gangster families, that your nervous system with its imprint and its DNA that believes that it has the plan of how life should be. And at least 2/3 of humanity speak not just with forked tongue, King Wasabi, but they speak in such a subjective way as to be dangerous. That people are dangerous to one another on a local level, an individual level, and then large groups of people are dangerous to one another just verbally. Wars are started over misspeaks, over somebody just getting mad and saying something. Maybe he says something and a prime minister here, a translator says, well, Prime Minister, King so-and-so just called you he did what? Blah, blah, blah. He wants verification of what he said. Another king goes, what did he say? Reservations? Yeah, I got reservations. Yeah, he said, yeah. And so you could say, well, boy, if they'd known what was going on, it was simply a mix-up, and a war got started. Talk. You would be critical of it. You would say, thousands of lives are lost because these two guys, these two kings, had to go through a translator. Or even maybe not a translator, but you could say it was a subjective conversation, and here it is. They started a war, and some of my family members were killed because of a slip of the damn tongue, or because of subjective speech. Something should be done about it. See? That is your own subjective speech about that. And that what I'm saying is a kind of objective language beyond that is you realize that you don't understand enough, that no one does at that level, to make any comment about that. It certainly looks that way. But at the three-dimensional level, you got to remember this, everything looks every way. So what's the news? Well, there are one or two areas that we should do something about. Well, you can forget you could have a PhD in mathematics, but you might as well forget any idea of an objective language as long as you go, well, no. Tut over here. Call in the cosmic wrecking crew or somebody to clean this up. Bring down the wrath or the remedial action of the gods. The kind of objective language I was suggesting to you as possible outside the world of numbers that I warned you was not as crude as it sounded when I kept saying would be a kind of language wherein you didn't care, is that you know better than to care at the ordinary level. It's not that you're unfeeling and blah, blah, blah. It's that any comment you have that you look over here and here's one group abusing another group and you say, well, here it is. There is a living example that 2 and 3 is 5. You reap what you sow, which is just another version. They're getting just, this first group has mistreated the other group, the second group, and now they're reaping the whirlwind. We should do something. They shouldn't talk it to one another like that. You're in the same ballpark. The kind of transitory consistency, a kind of map that a neurosubversive could be using, the notion would be not that he has any consistency right now, or that there is some permanent map, that now I've got it. I got it folded up inside of my own brain. Now I got it. Now I got the secret. No, you don't. The best you could think would be a kind of notion that, yeah, I got something that is obviously not, you don't have to debate all this, I'm saying it for you, that's obviously no longer ordinary. It's not ordinary language, it's not ordinary maps, but even it's not permanent. But it's somewhere in another verbal land. That's why I said you could conceive of it through the notion of it being a kind of transitory consistency. That things are consistent enough that you can use them. And as soon as it's not useful, or as soon as you see, well, hey, I can see beyond this, then you do not care that you dropped the map. But the one that you thought, boy, after all these years, I have now had a great brain thought. I'm having new thoughts now. This is what's going to take me to the top. This is it. This is what I've been working for. Okay. All those little dramatics, theatrics, I assume you understood, was like a real revolutionist. That doesn't mean much more. Right now, enjoy it. The first cold beer on a hot summer day, I'll grant you. If the second one ever tasted that good, I'd be a drunk. The first one. So when you have the thoughts, you can go in that first beer. But, forget it. The next one, the next one, you begin to get full and your brain will get slow and you begin to get bloated. You'll lay down and take a nap at the very least. This kind of map, I've got something here. It's on the basis, though, of transitory consistency. That is, God almighty, is this useful? Probably for a second. You don't have to say a second, but the point is, that the second drink, the second time you look at this, is going to be like the second beer. And anybody with any taste whatsoever, and I assume everybody's got some decent taste about beer, I don't know what you're doing here. There is no such thing as a second beer, really, that tastes good. Nothing like the first. To look at that map. This map, this will make me. This is what I've been after. Right. Crush that little can, show off now that they can make those cheaper cans. But that's how long that piece of information is good for. That is a form of a operational objective language. That you not only do not care what words say at the three-dimensional level, you do not have any more criticism of what life may be doing, since you do not know what the initial premise is, you do not know what life's intending, then when you begin to get glimpses here and there that are nonverbal, but they constitute, the nervous system itself wants to grab and say, well, this is, now you've got a thought, now we're getting somewhere. By the time you drink that one time, you've got to be prepared to turn around and not care about that. To realize, oh God, I should have stopped. But now that I've seen this, that was so good, I was going to write a book. I figured I'd finally get famous and rich off fooling around with this stuff, because it came to me a novel. To call it an allegorical novel is the world's understatement. It was going to make me rich, and I'd already started writing on it. And then last night, I just kept thinking about this, and it was so great. And suddenly, it was like a new map came and went, boom, And if the truth be known, if I had to put it into words, you'd have to admit now I can't write that great novel I'd already started. Because now what I understand makes that kind of, it's like the second beer of the day. It's almost, people don't look at it this way necessarily, but it's almost as though I should have stopped when I was ahead. I should have stopped when I was smarter than I was to start with. At least I got to the point I knew more than my uncle does. But now I know more than I did back when I knew more than my uncle did. Therefore, all the maps I had now are outdated. That's known as TS. T.S. Eliot, few people don't tell you. He was the original scratch guitar player with James Brown's 1960 band. I had one more little aside, as long as I brought this up. How about considering some kind of digital alternative in the world of human language, mathematically and otherwise, but nowadays I assume you people can stretch it out. Right quick, I'm just going to do this and leave it. But how about the good digital, truly and allegorically, basis of information under certain guises of it being either on or off? How about alternatives? Instead of on and off, it'd be if/when. Or here/there. Or, for anybody that's really good, here/here. Let me see if we've got time to pick up a few other things from last time we were taping. You remember I was mentioning talk as being the great distancer. How talk keeps a necessary distance between what one is doing, playing your horn, presenting your lecture on the British Romantic poets, but keeping a distance between what one is doing and what one may be. You can also look at it. I wanted to just, if you remember where we were, I don't have time for me to go back and repeat it all to get you back up to speed. But it keeps a distance between you, a noun, and whatever it is you may be doing. Verbing. That talk itself keeps that distance, and it keeps the distance within your own ordinary perception of you and of what you're doing. Come on, that's not weird. At the ordinary level, if you could not talk to yourself, that is, if you could not think what you're doing, you wouldn't know what you were doing. And if you get really good, you might conceive of this possibility of getting into the real transitory consistent zone, that if you couldn't think about what you were doing, you might not be able to do anything. You could eat. You could get down and get funky enough to keep the race going, and you could get in out of the cold. But beyond that, if you could not think about what you were doing, I ask you, are you sure you could do anything else? Talk acting is a great distancer. I'll push right along, being pleasantly spurred by the success of the last few minutes. Or looked at it another way, not caring. Talk acting as a distancer. Talk keeping a needed distance between what one is doing and what one is. Between what one is doing and what one says one is doing even. This kind of distancer, if you can see it, is really a curious phenomenon. Although it happens constantly, it's just going on, but it is curious in the sense that it's almost like a servant taking charge of himself. All right. If you think I don't care, if you don't like that. All right, it's like a mortar shell. It's like a bomb that has its own strategy and its own target. All right, try this. if you can see beyond the individual examples, whatever they may be, you can see that talk, in a wider sense, talk serves itself. Well, that was not as strange as you thought. It serves itself, if for no other reason for a second for me to point out, as opposed to what we had mentioned several times in the last several weeks of taping, as opposed to it being simply serving the purpose of conveying specific information. That talk is serving itself almost, period. And then to say, well, it is serving other purposes because talk serves a purpose to convey information, facts, figures, opinions, feelings. All right. But as always, you can take it, if you can see it beyond a local level and in a wider, more manifold view, talk is serving itself. It's what I said. It's a bomb that somebody almost, that no one is in charge of. Where will we drop this? At what altitude? What kind of angle? What kind of trigonometry is involved for us doing this? It's like you've got a bomb. Again, we got to play in Medeus Res and come in the middle and say, well, suddenly here we got a bomb, and there it is. And the son of a gun, it's as though that thing is its own master. That in somewhere it's got its own plans, its own strategy, and God knows what it is. I mean, there's a bomb. What kind of plans has that bomb got if we got no humans involved? But if with its own strategy, its own plans, its own targets. I didn't mean to get melodramatic, but that's almost frightening. Talk doesn't frighten anybody. The idea of talk serving itself, of a servant being in charge of itself. All right, I'll put it to you another way. Take all of that and let's put it in this sentence. Defenses don't come much better than that. Think about a barbed wire fence, a cerebral barbed wire fence with a mind of its own. Better than any watchdog. You got a defense mechanism that you do not have to even deal with. You don't have to talk to it. You don't have to set the alarms. You don't have to go out and feed the dog. You don't have to make sure that the wires haven't been cut. Remember that ordinary talk being a kind of defense to the growing, continuing, young function of the human intellect. What better defense is it than a defense that serves itself? That a defense that answers to no one. Now, of course, the ordinary level, you think, well, talk answers to me. That's silly, because I'm the one that talks. Right. Yeah. Got me there. It's just absolutely silly. Well, that's beyond silly. It's just not even worth discussing. You know, I'm right. It's not worth discussing. How about another couple of little things you can listen right quick? Remember I was talking about consistency, evidence, and the ideal state of things possibly being what they are not. You remember all that. There is within that a theorem, an operational theorem, having to do with everything I've been talking about tonight and last time. And that is that nothing will be seen to be universally consistent when studied in a lesser dimension. That is, if you're trying to establish some consistency, let us say, for example, of five-dimensional affairs, and you're attempting to locate it and establish the consistency in the 3D world, then may I say to you that there is a great tendency to be dissatisfied with the outcome. That was a certain amount. Now that I needed dramatics and theatrics, I didn't do it. There was a certain amount of good-natured sarcasm in there. You should have heard based upon the theorem I just gave. you cannot take, and I'm just using for example, just making them up, that if there is a 5D world running, a universe going on, whatever it is going on, the parts there going on, let's say that the three-dimensional parts that we know are not dissimilar to at least 3/5 of that world, all right? But trying to analyze whatever you've got here, assuming there's more than what we've got here, but taking 3D analyzations at the best the human intellect can do at ordinary levels, what you're going to come up with cannot be consistent. In fact, the most conclusive evidence possible in a 3D existence may be that which is the most inconsistent. Which again, I'll grant you right quick, especially since the tape's running out, that this is getting more and more insane, and thank God we're almost out of tape, right? But at that level, the most conclusive evidence, and of course I'm saying it's insane, it's not necessarily, if some of you think about even right up to date, quantum physics, and etc. And those of you who know how to do it good, think about even the general run of the ideas, the theories regarding human personality and sociological behavior. The most conclusive evidence possible, there is no conclusive, but the most conclusive evidence possible at this level may be those very things that are most inconsistent. That doesn't sound at all familiar with what they're talking about, what little I keep up with quantum physics nowadays, subparticle physics. They're not getting almost to that point. And once cosmology begins to take a bigger role in physics, they're just going in the same direction in another way. That the evidence that is most inconsistent is being what? They don't call it this, they don't use my terms, but this inconsistent evidence is now that which they do what? More and more. Depend on. Well, they don't like it, and they keep saying, well, something's wrong, but the damn thing works. This inconsistent evidence. I mean, it's the best, the closer we think we're getting to reality, the evidence gets more and more what? Quirky. It's not quarky, but it gets quirky, it gets slimy and slinky, and just inconsistent. Except in a certain way, once you know it's inconsistent, well, you can kind of deal with it, sort of. I mean, now I can't talk to your person about that. We'd have to go into mathematics, and then people go, well, never mind. Because that's the closest way to explain it, but that's it. We're out of tape. Which it could be worse, you could be out of your mind. Right. You could be out of your clothes. Cheerio.